When we think about a financial audit today, there's this clear expectation of clinical precision,
Oh, yeah. It's completely binary in our modern system.
right? You picture this sterile conference room. You have the accountant sitting there pointing to the red ink on a spreadsheet, and the auditor looks at the numbers and says, the math does not lie. The money is gone.
You either have the funds in the account or you're facing insolvency. The numbers dictate the reality.
Solvent or insolvent. It's clean. And frankly, it's comforting.
We definitely like things to be visible and categorized.
Yeah, we want them to follow strict, predictable rules. But then you step into the world of first-century agrarian economics mixed with divine grace, and suddenly that pristine accounting ledger is thrown completely out the window.
It really is.
We find ourselves looking at a moral and theological landscape that is, quite honestly, scandalous to our modern sensibilities. So, welcome to Reformed Thinking.
Glad to be here.
Today, we're taking a comprehensive deep dive into the source material surrounding a text that has baffled superficial readers and armed critics for centuries. I'm talking about Luke 16, verses 1 through 8, which is widely known as the parable of the unjust steward.
And this specific text stands out as a massive theological stumbling block for anyone clinging to self-righteousness.
Oh, 100%.
It confronts our standard notions of fairness and merit head-on.
So our mission today is to unlock this narrative. When you look at the historical sources we gathered for this discussion, the misinterpretations are wild.
They really are all over the map.
You have Julian the Apostate in the 4th century claiming Jesus actually sanctioned white-collar embezzlement.
Which is just an incredible misreading.
Right. And then you fast forward to modern times, and the sources show liberal theologians pushing this text as some sort of manifesto for class warfare.
While prosperity preachers twist it to justify unbiblical greed.
Yeah, the material we're analyzing today argues that resolving this intense confusion requires placing the text strictly within its first-century Middle Eastern setting.
And furthermore, the sources insist we have to view it through the lens of strict monergistic grace.
That specific historical and theological framing is the core issue here.
Spot on. If you read this parable through a 21st century Western banking paradigm, you will miss the central point entirely.
You really will.
To comprehend the shocking nature of this story, we must step far outside our corporate capitalist assumptions. We have to enter the high-stakes, ruthless agrarian economy of the ancient Roman world.
Okay, so let's set the stage. The sources detail the socioeconomic reality of first-century Galilee. We are dealing with an agrarian system characterized by absentee landlords.
Right.
Let's build that picture for the listener. What did this world actually look like?
Well, in first-century Roman-occupied Galilee, the economy was dominated by a system of agrarian landlordism. You had wealthy landowners who frequently resided in major urban centers, places like Jerusalem, Alexandria, or even Rome.
So they weren't actually on the farms.
Not at all. These individuals were completely detached from the daily grinding operations of their massive farming estates. They didn't want to deal with the dirt, the weather, or the local peasant disputes.
Makes sense.
So to bridge that enormous geographical and operational gap, they employed an estate manager. The Greek word used in the text is oikonomos.
Oikonomos.
Yeah. And this manager possessed absolute legal authority to act on behalf of the master in all business dealings.
So we need to clarify his status for a second. He's not a guy getting paid minimum wage to sweep the grain silos.
No.
He's not a simple clerk filing receipts.
Far from it. The oikonomos held tremendous power. This administrator negotiated lease terms with tenant farmers, collected agricultural rents, and bound the master in contracts that carried the full weight of the law.
Oh.
He essentially held the master's signet ring.
He has full power of attorney.
Precise.
Whatever paper he signs, whatever deal he makes, the master is legally obligated to honor it. That places an immense amount of trust in one individual.
It does, and we have to recognize how these rents were actually paid. The tenant farmers working these massive estates didn't hand over small leather pouches of Roman coins.
Right, because cash was relatively scarce in rural areas.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Instead, they paid their rent in fixed, massive quantities of agricultural commodities harvested directly from the land.
Like the oil and wheat.
Yeah. The text mentions specific outstanding debts: 100 measures of oil and 100 measures of wheat.
Here is where the source material gets really fascinating, because when a modern reader hears the word measures, they picture, a few 5-pound bags of flour from the grocery store and maybe a couple of glass bottles of olive oil.
A very small-scale operation.
Yeah, But the historical data details the specific scale of these commodities. We're talking about roughly 800 gallons of olive oil.
Which is huge.
And about 1,100 bushels of wheat. This paints a mental picture of a massive, commercial-scale farming operation. We are far removed from a quaint village garden where someone grows a few vegetables in the backyard.
The scale is staggering when you break down the logistics. 800 gallons of olive oil represents immense commercial fortunes.
I can't even imagine.
Think about the labor required. You have to cultivate the olive groves, harvest the fruit by hand, crush it in massive stone presses, and store it in hundreds of clay amphorae.
That's a massive industrial effort.
It is. That amount of oil is equivalent to years of intense agricultural labor for a typical peasant family. Olive oil was used for cooking, lighting lamps, medicine, and international trade. It was the liquid gold of the ancient Mediterranean.
And then you have the wheat, 1,100 bushels.
That volume of wheat is enough to feed an entire Galilean village for a very long time.
Wow.
This oikonomos was handling the equivalent of millions of dollars in modern agricultural futures. He was managing commodities that sustained entire regional economies.
So, if we are translating this for you, the listener, picture a modern corporate executive running a multinational subsidiary.
That's a good comparison.
He controls the supply chain, the pricing, the contracts. But then suddenly he faces a whistleblower complaint. And this is where the cultural aspect shifts the narrative in a direction we might not expect.
All right.
The sources point out that this specific culture operated on a strict honor-shame matrix. The charges of squandering the master's goods, the Greek word is diascorpizon, did not originate from a forensic accounting audit.
No, it didn't.
They originated from community gossip.
Understanding that dynamic is crucial. In the ancient Near East, a man's public reputation for generosity, honor, and nobility carried far more social and practical value than physical currency.
His reputation was everything.
If you lost your honor, you lost your ability to function in society. The charges brought against the manager came from the local townspeople.
The village grapevine.
Yeah, the neighbors, the village elders, the tenant farmers themselves noticed that the steward was wasting the master's resources. By doing so, he was bringing intense public shame upon the master's household.
Let's pause and think about what that means for the master's reaction.
Okay.
If I imagine a modern CEO getting an anonymous tip about a vice president embezzling funds, the first thing they do is secure the building.
They freeze everything.
Right. They freeze the bank accounts, confiscate the laptop, hire an outside auditing firm, and scrutinize the ledgers behind closed doors.
Standard protocol.
But here, the master acts almost entirely on community rumors. Why does he bypass the ledger check and go straight to judgment?
Because public shame drove ancient justice. The master's opening question to the steward is not an ignorant request for data. He asks, "What is this I hear about you?" This is a formal, public-sounding deposition taking place in a private space. The master's honor is bleeding out in the village square.
People are tough.
The community knows the steward is corrupt, which means the community is starting to think the master is either foolish for hiring him in the first place or completely weak for keeping him around.
So the master's reputation is on a timer.
Very much so.
The longer the steward stays employed, the more incompetent the master looks to the public.
That is precisely the issue. To preserve his honor, the master must act decisively based on the community's report. The situation doesn't require a prolonged investigation because the social verdict has already been rendered by the village.
The public nature of the accusation means the legal standing of the steward is completely nullified the moment the master speaks.
Instantly.
The sources indicate that recognizing the sheer scale of the operation makes the steward's failure monumental. We are talking about colossal mismanagement.
Yes.
But the commentators in our source stack also point out that we need to see where this narrative sits structurally in Scripture to grasp its full theological weight.
The canonical placement changes how you read the entire text.
Yeah, tell us about that chapter break.
Well, there is a historical tragedy of Bible formatting that occurred when 4th century monastic scribes introduced a chapter break separating Luke 15 from Luke 16.
A tragedy of formatting.
Truly. Those scribes were trying to make the texts easier to reference, but that break artificially severed the parable of the unjust steward from its immediate predecessor.
Which is the parable of the prodigal son.
Right. They belong together.
It's like watching the second half of a movie without seeing the first half. Imagine walking into the theater late. You see a guy doing something crazy with legal documents in a desperate panic, and you have no context for the director's overarching theme.
You'd be totally lost.
The sources argue that if you read chapter 16 in total isolation, you're practically guaranteed to fall into a moralistic misreading of the text.
And that misreading causes readers to miss the established theme of radical, unmerited grace that Luke is building.
Let's look at the parallels.
When you remove the chapter break, the textual parallels between Luke 15 and Luke 16 become striking. Both parables feature a noble superior and a wayward subordinate who squanders resources.
Even the vocabulary is the same, right?
Yes, Luke uses the exact same Greek root word for squandering in both stories. The prodigal son scattered his inheritance in a distant land, and the steward scattered his master's goods in the business ledgers.
Both the younger son and the steward face a terrifying moment of sudden exposure, a moment where the illusion of their autonomy completely collapses.
It's a brutal wake-up call for both.
The famine hits the prodigal son, and the audit hits the steward.
Yes, and most crucially, both subordinates survive their respective crises solely because the offended superior is astonishingly gracious.
That's the key.
The father runs to the prodigal son, displaying costly, undignified grace. As we'll see, the master in Luke 16 will display costly, reputation-saving mercy. Furthermore, the sources note this narrative sequence leads directly into Christ's severe warnings to the Pharisees, who are explicitly identified in the text as lovers of money.
Pharisees are standing right there in the crowd listening to this entire discourse.
They are part of the direct audience.
Wow.
And the sequence then concludes with the sobering historical account of the rich man and Lazarus, which warns of fixed eternal realities. If you view this structurally, as many Reformed commentators suggest, it aligns with a dispensational understanding of the massive transition occurring in the first century.
Let's unpack that dispensational aspect for a moment. What transition are the sources talking about?
The Pharisees represent the corrupt, self-serving stewardship of the Old Covenant leadership.
Okay.
They were entrusted with the oracles of God, the temple system, and the spiritual care of the nation, but they squandered it.
Ah, so they are the unjust stewards.
Spot on. Their stewardship was actively being taken away by God in real time as Christ inaugurated the new covenant. Meanwhile, the disciples, whom Jesus refers to as the sons of light, are receiving instruction on how to manage temporal resources in light of this impending dispensational transition.
The kingdom is arriving, the old order is passing away, and the religious leaders are hoarding the temple wealth while their spiritual ledgers are entirely bankrupt.
They're clinging to a sinking ship.
With the prodigal connection established in our minds, let's look at the exact moment the steward's massive mismanagement is violently dragged into the light. We arrive at the confrontation.
The narrative begins with that legal deposition we mentioned earlier. What is this I hear about you? Render the account of your stewardship.
Yeah.
The master issues an absolute decree of immediate dismissal. He says, you can no longer be steward. At that second, the manager's legal standing is instantly nullified.
He's fired on the spot.
Yes. Now, he temporarily retains physical possession of the physical books before they're formally handed over for the final review, but his authority is gone.
This brings up a fascinating grammatical detail highlighted heavily in the sources. In the face of this sudden termination, the steward offers absolutely no verbal defense.
What?
He doesn't say a single word to the master.
That silence is incredibly loud in the original language.
Mm-hmm.
In Greek, there are specific verbs commonly used for self-defense in legal or formal settings.
Like what?
Well, Luke could have used apologiomai, which means to verbally defend oneself against a charge,
Okay.
or atiomai, which means to accuse others and shift the blame.
And he uses neither.
The steward uses none of them. He doesn't plead for a second chance. He doesn't try to negotiate a repayment plan. He doesn't blame the weather for a bad crop.
I want to propose a counter thought here, just based on human nature.
Sure.
The natural human instinct for self-preservation is overwhelmingly strong. Think about it. If you get called into the boss's office tomorrow and you're accused of losing millions of dollars, your brain immediately scrambles for an excuse.
You definitely try to save yourself.
You deflect. Why didn't he simply blame a bad harvest? Why didn't he say there was a terrible drought, or the tenant farmers were lazy, or the Roman taxes were too high to turn a profit?
He stays silent because the evidence against him in the community was insurmountable. And the master's justice was absolute.
He's caught.
The steward knows he's guilty. He knows the master knows he's guilty. Any excuse would be an insult to the master's intelligence. According to the Reformed commentators in our source material, this silence serves as a pristine theological picture of a sinner standing before the absolute holiness of God.
It strips away all the posturing.
It does. Right. As Romans 3:19 states, the law speaks so that every mouth may be stopped, and the whole world may be held accountable to God.
Every mouth stop.
When true exposure before a holy God occurs, it annihilates all our practiced excuses. We might have 100 rationalizations ready for our peers, but before the judge of the earth, the mouth is stopped.
That concept cuts straight across the grain of modern culture.
Very much so.
We live in an era of perpetual victimhood, where every personal failure is routinely blamed on a systemic issue, a psychological trauma, or circumstances supposedly beyond our control.
We always have an alibi.
We are conditioned to always have a defense ready. But here, the ledger is open, the truth is laid bare, and the mouth is completely shut.
The sources contrast this silent, profound guilt with the modern seeker-sensitive paradigm.
Right, let's talk about that.
That specific church paradigm frequently presents God as an indulgent deity who is willing to negotiate over sin.
Like a therapist.
Yeah, it suggests that God grades on a curve, taking our difficult modern circumstances into account. It portrays a God who listens to our excuses and nods sympathetically.
But that's not what we see here.
Not at all. The master's justice in this parable is swift, decisive, and immutable. There is no negotiation over the squandered goods. The sentence is pronounced and the stewardship is over.
So, rendered entirely speechless before the master, the steward is forced into a private moment of brutal self-assessment.
The reality sets in.
He walks out of that tense confrontation holding the physical ledgers, knowing he has only a matter of hours before he must hand them over permanently. This leads to his soliloquy, his internal monologue, which the sources argue establishes a massive theological realization.
In verse 3, the steward asks himself, "What shall I do? For my master is taking the stewardship away from me."
Okay.
And then he coldly assesses his remaining earthly options. To dig I do not have strength. To beg I am ashamed.
To dig I do not have strength. To beg I am ashamed. The theological material we're reviewing connects this directly to the Reformed doctrine of total inability. Let's walk the listener through what that means.
Total inability is the doctrine asserting that a fallen sinner is entirely devoid of the capacity to execute any spiritual good accompanying salvation.
Okay.
Let's look at how the parable illustrates this. The steward evaluates his inherent physical capacity first. The Greek verb used is ishu, which denotes physical strength or muscular power.
And he's an office guy.
Right. He looks at his hands. He's a white-collar administrator. He literally doesn't have the muscular capacity to survive performing brutal manual labor in the Galilean fields under the sun.
Theologically speaking, the fallen sinner cannot dig. He cannot earn justification through the sweat of his brow.
It's impossible.
He cannot rely on legalistic works, intense moral effort, or personal reformation to satisfy the infinite demands of God's justice.
The effort is futile. You cannot dig your way out of a debt of this magnitude.
I think of a bankrupt individual attempting to pay off a $10 million legal settlement by handing the judge a maxed-out, expired credit card.
That's a great image.
It's not just that the effort is insufficient, it's categorically impossible. He lacks the required currency of the court.
That analogy captures the desperation perfectly. And then he also concludes he is ashamed to beg.
Right.
This represents total social bankruptcy. In the ancient Middle Eastern community, an able-bodied man sitting in the dirt begging was viewed with utter contempt. It was the ultimate social degradation.
He'd lose whatever tiny shred of dignity he had left.
Precisely. The commentators align this with the theological truth that man's natural pride violently rebels against admitting utter bankruptcy to plead for free grace. We despise the humiliating posture of standing before God with completely empty hands. We want to bring something to the table.
This physical and social paralysis functions as a precise mirror for spiritual death. The sources point out that this completely dismantles both Arminian and Pelagian concepts of cooperative free will.
Yes.
Let's frame those arguments for the listener so they understand the debate. Pelagianism suggests we can just decide to dig really hard, live a moral life, and please God on our own merits.
That we have the raw power to just fix it.
And Arminianism suggests we're injured but still retain enough capacity to at least muster up the dignity to meet God halfway, to cooperate in our rescue.
Like we can reach out our hand.
But the steward realizes he has nothing to offer. Zero inherent capacity. He cannot work, and his pride blocks him from begging.
He is spiritually dead, completely paralyzed, and utterly incapable of rescuing himself from the impending decree of termination. The old life is officially over. The door is actively closing. He concludes he has zero inherent capacity to save himself from ruin.
Having deduced that horrifying reality, he calculates that his survival now rests on a single external variable, the character of his judge.
He has to look outside himself.
This brings us to the calculated gamble on sovereign mercy. The sources spent a lot of time on this specific sequence of events.
Knowing he only has hours before the physical ledgers must be handed over, the steward summons the debtors privately. The text says he acts tachus, meaning quickly, in haste.
There's extreme urgency.
Oh, massive urgency. He forces them to sit down and drastically reduce their massive debts in their own handwriting.
Play this out for us. He calls in the first guy. How much you owe my master? 800 gallons of oil. Take your bill, sit down quickly, and write 400.
Just slashing it in half.
Then the next guy walks in. How much do you owe? 1,100 bushels of wheat. Take your bill and write 880. Why does he insist on having them write the new numbers in their own handwriting?
That is the absolute brilliance of this cultural maneuver. By having the debtors write the reductions themselves, the steward creates the public illusion that the master authorized this grand, noble gesture. He summons them individually to maintain strict control over the narrative. In an honor-shame culture, the debtors would never assume a fired manager was doing this rogue.
They wouldn't even conceive of it.
That would be unthinkable. They assume the steward is acting under the master's direct orders to distribute unprecedented grace to the struggling tenant farmers.
The audacity of this scheme is staggering. Let's bring this into a modern context so you, the listener, can feel the weight of what is happening. It's like a rogue fired employee from a major tech firm using his last hour of system access to give away millions of dollars in company stock to random citizens.
Just wiring it out to everyone.
He executes the transfers, logs out, and banks entirely on the CEO wanting to keep the good public relations rather than reversing the transactions and looking like a villain.
It's a huge gamble.
The Galilean debtors leave the office, go back to the village, and start throwing a massive party celebrating the landowner.
They are out in the streets celebrating his unprecedented generosity. They think he is the greatest patron in the region.
And then,
the steward walks into the master's office and hands over the altered books. At that precise moment, the master is caught in a profound cultural trap.
break down the mechanics of that trap based on the historical context. What are the master's options?
Legally speaking, the master has every right to reverse the discounts.
Right. It was fraud.
He can go out to the village square, halt the celebrations, and announce, "My former steward is a fraud. You still owe me the full amount of oil and wheat. Pay up."
But if he does that...
If he chooses that route, he becomes a hated, ruthless tyrant in the eyes of the community. He destroys the public celebration, crushes their joy, and ruins his reputation forever.
So what's the alternative?
His alternative is to let the altered ledger stand. He can absorb the massive financial loss himself, eat the cost of the oil and wheat, and maintain his pristine reputation as the most merciful and generous patron in all of Galilee.
The steward is betting his family's literal survival, his freedom from a Roman debtor's prison, entirely on the fact that his master is merciful.
Yes.
He rests his entire future on the superior's willingness to bear a massive personal loss. How did the theological sources define this as the essence of saving faith?
The commentators point out that the steward completely abandoned self-reliance. He doesn't try to pay back what he stole.
He doesn't set up a GoFundMe.
Right. He doesn't offer a 10-year payment plan to restore the funds. He essentially sins that grace might abound, staking his very existence on the known character of the master.
Staking everything on grace.
Saving faith is described in the Reformed sources as exactly this. Well, precisely this. The absolute cessation of self-justification and a desperate, radical gamble upon the free grace of God in Christ Jesus.
Because we have no merit.
We have no moral merit to claim. We cannot dig. We must correctly read the character of God, that he is gracious and willing to bear the infinite cost of our redemption, and cast ourselves entirely upon him.
The master's surprising reaction to this audacious trap sets up Christ's central, uncomfortable lesson for the disciples. We move into the concept of prudence over morality. Verse 8 says, "The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly."
The Greek word translated as shrewdly is phronimos. It denotes practical intelligence, foresight, and sharp skill in navigating a crisis.
But he doesn't praise the crime.
No, the master does not praise the steward's ethics. That is a common misunderstanding. The text explicitly maintains his title as the manager of unrighteousness.
Grace never calls evil good.
Never. The master is commending his clear-sighted calculation in the face of imminent ruin. The steward saw reality, counted the cost of his situation, and refused to delay action.
Jesus then applies the maxim to his audience. The sons of this age are wiser than the sons of light.
The sons of this age understand urgency.
The rebuke directed at the disciples is incredibly sharp. Think about it. The sons of this age plan for their retirement, their corporate survival, their business advantages, and their political leverage with incredible laser-like focus.
They are completely dialed in.
They read the market trends, they see a closing window of economic opportunity, and they act decisively to secure their future. The sources point out that unbelievers frequently act more decisively for perishing goods than believers act for imperishable truth.
There's a stinging irony here. A white-collar criminal, an absolute scoundrel, understands the gravity of a closing window better than most churchgoers.
It's true.
You see people spend decades building their retirement portfolios, agonizing over asset allocation, securing earthly real estate, meticulously managing their credit scores, and tracking their investments daily.
Checking the apps every morning.
Yeah. Yet they invest a tiny fraction of that zeal into prayer, personal holiness, or the propagation of the gospel.
Why do the sources suggest believers so frequently treat the coming kingdom as a theoretical concept rather than an impending crisis requiring urgent action?
The theological consensus points to spiritual sluggishness. The sons of light, who know the living God, who have been taught about the resurrection, the coming judgment, and the eternal state, often drift through life half awake.
We just hit snooze.
We handle eternal realities with a shocking level of apathy. The original disciples needed to feel the weight of that rebuke. If a corrupt manager shows absolute urgency about securing temporary earthly shelter, how much more should believers show urgency about securing everlasting truth?
It's a severe wake-up call.
Life under God is a strict stewardship. The master's summons is not a hypothetical scenario. The books will absolutely be required.
If the master absorbing the earthly debt is the primary mechanism of the steward's temporal salvation, we have to look at how this points directly to the ultimate cosmic transaction.
Right.
The sources draw a massive connection to the Christological fulfillment of the absorbed debt.
The parable functions as a stunning, vivid shadow of substitutionary atonement. The narrative hinges entirely on a massive sacrifice. The master willfully chooses to absorb a catastrophic financial loss to secure the salvation of his guilty servant.
He pays it himself.
He doesn't send the Roman guards to throw the steward into prison to rot until the debt is paid. He pays the price out of his own pocket to preserve his honor and extend mercy.
And the Reformed commentators draw the direct line from that act to Jesus Christ.
Christ is presented as the ultimate surety and the perfectly faithful oikonomos of the Father's house.
Where the earthly steward was corrupt,
Christ was perfectly obedient. The sources argue we are all unfaithful stewards who have squandered the glory and the resources of our Creator. We have accumulated an infinite spiritual debt that we cannot possibly pay.
the deficit is infinite.
And the absolute holiness of God demands pure justice. We cannot escape the decree of condemnation through our own efforts.
But Christ steps forward into that deficit.
Christ absorbed the infinite spiritual debt of our transgressions on the cross. The commentators point to John 19:30, where Jesus cried to telestai.
Telestai.
That is a commercial accounting term, meaning paid in full.
Let's connect the steward's altered paper ledgers to the spiritual ledger nailed to the cross. In Colossians 2:12, the Apostle Paul speaks of God canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands, nailing it to the cross.
It's a direct parallel.
This makes the abstract theological concept of double imputation fiercely tangible for you, the listener.
Double imputation is the teaching that our sin is legally credited to Christ, and his perfect righteousness is legally credited to us.
A total ledger swap.
The unrighteous steward manipulated physical ledgers to erase debt through trickery. But at the cross, God legally, justly, and permanently erased our debt by transferring it to the Son.
Incredible.
Christ paid a debt he did not owe because humanity owed a debt it could not pay. He substituted his perfect active and passive obedience for our squandered stewardship.
The sources argue this permanently refutes certain theological systems, specifically Roman Catholic theology regarding purgatory or penance, don't they?
Yes, the Reformed commentators in our stack make a very strong argument against those concepts based on this text.
How so?
Roman Catholicism teaches that a person must undergo a period of temporal punishment in purgatory or perform acts of penance to satisfy the remaining debt of sin.
Like paying off a balance.
Right. But the scholars argue the master in the parable did not demand that the steward work off the remaining debt over thousands of years. The debt was completely absorbed by the master unconditionally.
It's just gone.
It requires zero cooperative satisfaction from the servant. The active and passive obedience of Christ satisfies the justice of God in full. According to this view, our spiritual ledgers are not just discounted, they are entirely cleared by the blood of the Lamb.
Knowing this staggering truth about substitution, our discussion has to turn to how the modern visible church and the individual believer are commanded to respond today.
We have to apply it.
The sources lay out an urgent application for the modern church.
The text demands immediate repentance from all forms of self-righteousness. If you're trusting in your moral decency, your baptism, or your religious heritage to balance your account before God, the commentators warn you are attempting to present a fraudulent ledger.
You're trying to cook the books.
You must own your total spiritual bankruptcy.
The statistics cited in the research are terrifying. Studies indicate over 60% of professing Western Christians believe they can earn heaven through good works.
The theological sources classify that as a catastrophic Arminian error. It suggests that a massive portion of the visible church fails to grasp the severity of divine justice and the necessity of monergistic grace.
They still think they can dig.
They believe they still have the strength to dig. The secular world instructs man to rely on his own intellect and moral effort to secure his future. But the argument presented here is that Christ exposes this self-reliance as an illusion. You must cast yourself entirely upon his unmerited mercy.
The source material also applies this heavily against modern ecclesiastical pragmatism. The authors argue that seeker-sensitive church growth movements act very much like the unrighteous steward, using worldly marketing tactics to alter God's message.
But the sources draw a vital distinction regarding intent.
Okay, what is it?
The seeker-sensitive pragmatists alter the message to make it popular with the world, seeking to attract consumers. The critique is that they exploit the sheep rather than drive them to the master's mercy.
By watering down the text.
They refuse to preach the offensive truths of sin, repentance, and divine wrath because it hurts attendance. The Lord commends prudence in the parable, but the commentators note he does not commend doctrinal compromise or manipulation of the truth.
I have to ask, based on the readings, is the obsessive pursuit of nickels and noses in church growth models a direct violation of the exact prudence, the precise prudence Jesus demands here? We see churches measuring success almost exclusively by attendance figures, budget sizes, and social media engagement.
The authors argue it is a severe violation. A church that worships earthly metrics is acting like a son of this age, not a son of light.
Wow.
True prudence relies on objective biblical promises. This leads the sources into a sharp critique of charismatic mysticism and continuationism as well.
That's a huge point.
The argument is that we do not need new subjective revelations, signs, or wonders to dictate our actions. The canon of Scripture is closed.
The Westminster Confession affirms that.
Yes, which aligns with this Reformed perspective, affirming that God's will is wholly contained in Scripture. Spiritual shrewdness means acting decisively upon the objective truth of the Bible, not chasing emotional experiences.
Moving to practical application, how do the sources suggest true believers manage temporal wealth in light of strict dispensational realities? We are looking at the pre-tribulational rapture and the premillennial return of Christ. The current administration of grace is temporary.
If the old dispensational order is passing away, the commentators stress we must not hoard the unrighteous mammon of this passing age. Earthly riches are fleeting.
Just look at the economy.
Look at the constant statistics of corporate fraud and sudden economic collapse. Believers are commanded to use temporal means to build the eternal kingdom.
Give us some concrete examples of faithful stewardship highlighted in the text. If a believer recognizes they are a son of light, what do the sources say they should do with their bank account tomorrow? How do they apply this prudence?
The applications are highly specific. Faithful stewardship involves funding classical theological education to ensure the rigorous transmission of truth to the next generation.
So seminary training.
Yes. It means actively supporting biblical missions that preach the true gospel, not social gospels. It involves organizing homes around biblical complementarianism, training children to look past the temporal delusions of this secular world.
It's an all-encompassing lifestyle change.
You expend your earthly wealth with extreme urgency for the propagation of the historic faith. You invest in realities that survive the grave.
You do not invest your soul in a sinking ship. You utilize the temporal things of this passing age with an absolute focus on the eternal realities.
That captures the essence of the instruction. If wealth is a temporary trust, The people of God must use it in a manner consistent with fidelity to God. Money cannot save anyone, but the sources argue it serves as a powerful diagnostic tool.
A diagnostic tool.
It reveals whether one serves God or mammon.
Let's summarize the absolute dichotomy presented in this deep dive. Picture yourself standing in the middle of a collapsing estate. The books have been called in. The audit is finalized.
There's no escaping it.
You have zero physical strength to dig your way out of debt, and your pride must be broken so you are no longer ashamed to beg. You must choose between presenting a fraudulent, self-righteous ledger to God, pointing to your church attendance, your charitable giving, your basic human decency, or acknowledging your total systemic ruin.
You can't fake the number.
You have to cease all attempts at self-justification and cast yourself entirely upon the finished redemption of Jesus Christ.
The unrighteous steward was a scoundrel, yet he possessed enough spiritual common sense to know his only hope lay in the cost-bearing mercy of his Lord. He gambled his entire life upon that mercy. He trusted the master's character, and he was commended for his prudence.
Think about what that means for you. Consider the debtors in the village. They walked away from that estate office clutching pieces of parchment that said their crushing generational debts were slashed.
They were free.
They went home rejoicing over massive canceled debts. They celebrated the master's grace in the streets. But here's the catch. They were entirely unaware of the background machinations.
They had no idea how it happened.
They didn't know the steward was fired. They didn't know he was running a rogue scheme. They just knew the master was incredibly generous.
They celebrated a grace they did not fully understand.
Spot on. If even the unwitting beneficiaries of a scoundrel's trickery can publicly celebrate the master's generosity with that much passion, how much more radically should you, who know the true infinite cost paid by the Son of God on the cross, be living out a loud public celebration of that grace in every single area of your daily life?
You know the price that was paid. You know the ledger was nailed to the cross.
Evaluate your own ledgers before the master calls for the books. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Reformed thinking.